Irving, are you game? Obviously, yes, you're here.
Fine with me.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's get going. We'll get started here at 3 and maybe someone else will show up. Um, the first topic today is class injuries, and I know if you have a copy of the outline, it's a really detailed injury because I've been through it so many times that there's, how do you say, and I've been uh, for a while, I was an advanced backpack instructor, and that was before mountaineering first aid came out. Um, and that's completely different. But there are just certain things that you need to do to not only as a CYA cover yourself, but to make an injured student feel better. Um, and so I guess if it, Darren, do you have a copy of the outline there?
No, Sensei, I don't have it in front of me.
Okay, do you want me to quickly send it to you?
It's on my email, right? I think it's on my email.
Might.
Pull it up. I can pull it up.
It would be at the Zoom notification. It would be at the bottom of that.
Okay.
I guess rather than me going through all this stuff, is there anything anywhere that anyone has any questions or wants to make comments about?
So the topics is oh yeah, I see the ones that they have that were previously covered.
Yeah, I don't know if we previously covered it or not, or we just kind of covered it superficially, or
Okay, all right. One, safety factor, respect for the dojo, sensei, Ryu, camaraderie, belonging, public impression, prevention.
yeah, we started with class injury prevention, facility agency procedures. I know there are some people who have programs at YMCA's, and the YMCA policy is don't do anything. Find the person who is in charge of the Y and ask them what to do. Which to me is not, I just object to that. It's because they may not know what to do. I've seen some people, we'll call them administrators, say, well, get the person off the mat so the class can continue. I mean, that's looking at a lawsuit. uh, I've seen some administrators where they, well, I know how to take care of a shoulder dislocation, which is relatively easy to fix, but if you trap the nerve inside the shoulder joint, you're in serious trouble. So is this student that's injured. I mean, it's the basic rule for and assuming you're first aid trained. And my first aid training goes back to the 60s, where we actually learned how to set splints and all this other neat stuff, 2-man carries and 3-man carries, and how to drag a person out of a building. You know how to drag a person if you have to move them if they're injured? This is one of those really stupid questions, but by their feet.
No. By your feet.
What? Oh, what?
Unless they have a broken leg.
Yeah.
Unless they have a leg or foot injury. But the reality is, if you have an injured student, you don't move them unless it's absolutely necessary, and that's where many people mess up. The other biggest thing that I've had to deal with, most common injury I've had to deal with is shock. And as I told Irving with this student that had the multiple fractures in his leg, fortunately he went into shock. He was conscious, but he was in shock. And fortunately he couldn't feel anything because he was in shock. And I treated him for shock until paramedics got there. But and the weirdest injury I had was early on. All of you know what those ice packs are, and they say, put a towel in between the person's body or paper towels or something between that and the ice pack. Well, this is before they had that warning on them, and I actually had a student who had hurt his hand. We put an ice pack on it. It froze the back of his hand. He got so panicked, he went into shock. We have called paramedics. Here it is 110 degrees outside. And they had to treat this poor kid for frostbite. But it's people will go into shock for the weirdest things. And you just have to be able to recognize it and treat it. And you can get a person out of it relatively fast if it's not a serious injury, maybe 10, 15 minutes, but you need to call paramedics anyway because you don't mess with shock. It can be fatal. Anyway, anything else before I get sidetracked and dig into this too deeply?
I think that, Sensei, I think that every dojo should have the basic understanding of some sort of first aid emergency protocol, right? And so what can you do? I think all of those things will eventually become limited depending on the severity of any injury that happens inside of a classroom environment. And so with that thought, I mean, even we're fortunate. We have a few doctors that are regularly in class with us. And fortunately, we have avoided, any injuries. I mean, obviously everybody has these little minor knickknacks or whatever, type injuries, but for any severe injuries, we've been pretty fortunate to avoid those things for a long time. I haven't seen an injury that was significant in a classroom environment in a very, very long time. Thank God. So, but being able to attend to any injury, and make sure that you're going through the correct process, could be subjective to, not only the individual, but the injury itself, and then the environment. And then what do you do? There's other factors that come into play that you just touched on, whether it's legal concerns or, how do you get them there to, I guess the priority, and it always should be, is the well-being of the individual that has been injured, but then, what do you do with it? So there's a lot of questions that come with that. And I think the basic understanding or basic protocol for an emergency response in that type of situation is that you do what's necessary for the best response to the individual that has been injured until the proper responders get there, EMS, fire, whoever it might be. And I think that needs to be the clearest understanding inside of a dojo environment.
I think what I want to stress is that you as the instructor, I don't really care what a supervisor thinks if I have an injured student. And I think you as a sensei have to be willing to take the responsibility and step up and say, this person needs a paramedic, or I mean, we all have cell phones now. You have one to call paramedic. And as you said, Darryn, fortunately, I usually have someone in the class who's a nurse, some sort of person who's in the actual medical profession that has a much better background than I do. And, it's a real asset. The one thing and the only issue you may run into if you're running a program through some community park or YMCA or something like that, is that you may have to fill out an accident report afterwards. And through experience, I've learned that you don't say they sprained their ankle, they broke their leg, their head was twisted off.
Yeah.
You say, things like injured their foot, injured their neck, because you're not a medical professional.
Yeah.
So you refrain from making any kind of quote unquote medical diagnosis. And I learned that partly from years ago. When I had a lawyer who was speaking to my government class, and he said, if you're ever in an auto accident and the police, they want to get rid of their paperwork. So they'll ask you what happened, they ask all these questions from the top of your head, and you may be totally stressed out from the accident itself, and you may say something that down the road can be used against you. So this attorney said, just say, I'm too stressed out, I can't say anything now. When you get home and calm down, write out what you think happened and rewrite it as many times as necessary until you're happy with it. And it's probably more accurate than what your perception is at the time of the accident. But don't show that paper to anyone. Don't let anyone know that you've written anything down, because if they get their hands on it, there might be something in there that could be used against you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a sad commentary, but you do have to be careful what you say sometimes.
Yeah, Sensei, I also agree with the fact that, look, we're not medical professionals, right? I'm not a doctor, I'm not a physician, I'm not a nurse or any of those type of people, but right. I 100% agree with what you have, especially, you make it very known that, when you reach a certain level within your curriculum, that you have to be able to do certain things in an effort to be able to respond to an emergency situation. And I think that needs to be a part of everybody's program. I mean, when you get to the intermediate level, you should have an understanding of what the proper protocols would be to address an injury if it does happen around you. Yeah. At a basic skill level, right? Not to advance anything, but know right. what to do. And right. so I do agree with that 100% as well.
Right. One of the things that Seki was adamant about, he required all of us to have a jujitsu first aid kit in our gi bags, which essentially was some Band-Aids, some elastic bandaging, like for a sprained wrist, nail clippers, some sort of antibiotic ointment or something like that if we had cut ourselves. I mean, just really simple stuff. And no one does that anymore. I mean, I still have it in my gi bag just out of habit, but he said stuff happens, and you have to, if you're going to be on the mat and you've twisted your wrist and it hurts, maybe you need to wrap it. Just to give it some protection and to let your partner know that to go easy on that wrist, right. Use your other wrist instead. We have a fairly extensive first aid kit for the dojo. I mean, it includes slings. I think we have one or two bubble casts for arm. We've never used this stuff, but how do you say, better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it?
That is correct, Sensei. Very correct.
Yeah. So, okay. Let's go on to something that's maybe a little easier to deal with and more exciting. Should there be a minimum age for students learning jujitsu?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, what? Go ahead.
I don't know what the age is. I know where I start taking jujitsu students strictly jujitsu. I'm not talking about judo or grappling or anything like that. I'm talking about,
Right.
for me personally, just like jujitsu. And the reason why I feel like that's important is because I think that the body itself, the human anatomy, is not prepared for the things that we do in true jujitsu, in all aspects. If we're doing joint locks and we're impacting somebody's anatomy, and the individual is not mature in their growth plates, sense, whatever, then that may impact something later on in the future for them. That's my outlook on it. And then, or are they mature enough to be able to do some of the things that we do in the class? Are they responsible enough to be able to do some of the things in the class? And do they understand how to be accountable behind doing some of the things that are class? Because everything that we do is designed to basically create injury. Ultimately, I mean, depending on what you're doing and how you're doing, if you don't understand the dynamics behind it, if you don't understand the concept behind it, if you don't understand the result of it, truly understand it as an adult in an adult mindset, then how can you truly be responsible for your actions if you're doing them somewhere, whether it be if you're playing or if you need it, whatever? Do you understand everything that's associated with the end result of that technique, right? I mean, because even the most mild thing that we do, let's say, in my opinion, one of the things that could be would be a choke. That's one of the most humane ways to be able to defend yourself, to be able to use. But do you understand what could happen with that choke if you were to hold it too long? What, like, it's really, if you hold it and you make someone pass out, there's nothing as an injury that could, and even for law enforcement, that's the most humane thing that they could do to be able to, and truly one of the only things, if not the only thing in certain circumstances, that could truly help them do something to defend themselves as a law enforcement official. But if you have these kids that are learning these chokes all over the place, and if you don't have any adult or responsible supervision that truly understands it, you see it all the time, which is a huge misconception of why law enforcement officials or security personnel in bars and clubs and all of these other things are always under some sort of legal action because they didn't know what they were doing or the result of it. And so I think that's all in understanding and education that kind of crossed over a little bit more about, the kids versus adults, but it's still tied together. And I think that's the reason for, you have to be able to have individuals that truly understand the outcome of what we're doing in a classroom environment.
Irving, feel free to speak up whenever you wish.
Hey, I'm getting over a sore throat, so I'm more than happy to listen in. But I agree. At what age? I think it depends on the individual child because, is it 10, 11, 12, 13? I have people that ask me all the time, at what age should they start the kids? And I said, I don't like a lot of the karate stuff because a lot of teachers don't teach you to pull and they let you extend your punches and everything, like kicks. And kids don't really realize how much damage a kid or a punch can do. So I encourage them to take gymnastics, like kinder gym or something like that, just to get the kids used to using and controlling the body before they get into a martial art. I don't like martial arts for 4 or 5-year-olds that they just don't have the mentality to know when to use it or not use it.
I mean, I will, if parents come and say, can I start my kid? And I say, what age are they? And they say, 8 or 9. I say, they would probably do a lot, as you said, Irving, they would probably do a lot better taking a gymnastics class, or a similar activity which would help them improve body coordination and development, rather than putting stresses on their body. Seki would take students as young as 10, because he felt at that point, for most 10-year-olds, their large muscle coordination is down and they understand they can injure another person. One of the things he always did was when he was teaching a technique, he would always explain, this is what, as Darryn has brought up, this is what the technique is designed to do. And yes, it is an injury. The second here.
Also, 1, 6, 6, 1, 4.
Bear with me for a second.
7.
And in any event, I will not take them until age 12. Because I'm looking for, as Darryn said, you've got the physical maturity to some extent, but again, they're more aware of what can be, yes, I can injure a person with this. And as sensei, we also have the responsibility that they need to develop a very good understanding of the word mate. Because once, how you say it, once, as I explain to my students, once whatever the person is doing to starts to hurt, damage has already been done to your body. So if you feel the hold is properly set, you need to tap out or say, mate, this is for your own protection. And then you work with the tori to complete the throw so they can finish the technique. But in jujitsu, as Darryn has said, everything is designed to ultimately injure the attacker. There are, in a street situation, there are no second chances. You don't want your attacker getting up and being able to potentially hurt you again.
Yeah, that's starting over, Sensei. I mean, you get into that topic and you're looking at, okay, if somebody's doing something to you and you're defending yourself and you were successful at doing that, and you stop, then they get up and attack you again. You started over. Okay, yeah. Hopefully I'm as lucky as I was the first time.
That's the first time, right? Because now they know you know something.
Right. It doesn't always go in your favor, right? And so you're back there. And I like the point that you brought up that you need to understand the word mate, right? And that comes in a lot of different forms. And so when we hear that, I like to express that when people, especially not only with people that's in the advanced students all the way to black belts and beyond, but just understanding mate and what it is, and how when you hear that doesn't mean I have another second. That doesn't mean that I can continue for another, like that means stop. Like that's it. Like there is no more from there. You don't go past, that. And so emphasizing what your intent is, what your meaning is, what you're doing behind hearing that is extremely important. Like you might see something. Usually the sensei could see something way before, or at least a little bit before something else happens. And you saying that, you're saying it for a reason. And so they should understand that.
Right. I mean, there have been situations with students, whether they be kids or adults, if I see a hold is set and I think things are going to go south, I, as a sensei, will say mate to get them to stop. I also tell them kind of facetiously, I said, how many of you know about Pavlov's dogs? With the ringing the bell and they'd salivate, the conditioned response. I said, that's what has to be in this dojo with respect to the word mate. If your partner says mate, as Darryn said, you stop. Because it's, usually whatever you're doing is correct, but it's going to cause a problem down the road. The only injury I've actually sustained in jiu-jitsu was from a 10-year-old kid. And Darryn has heard this. I was teaching Seki's class one night, and the kid set an armbar on me. And I wanted to find out what would happen if I resisted. And he maintained the armbar, and I dislocated my elbow. And I won't say he dislocated my elbow, I'll say I did.
Right.
And Fortunately, I was able to pop it back in, but I spent most of the rest of the evening consoling this 10-year-old kid who was really upset that he had hurt me. And then when Seki found out, he spent the next 2 months chewing me out every time I came to class.
Rightfully so, my sensei.
Right.
Look, that's another important thing. This takes us off topic again a little bit, just to deviate just for a second. But when you say tightness, when you say you feel like the lock has been applied correctly, when you feel pain, and so that one word right there confuses people, is pain, because not all the time do you feel discomfort in a technique that's applied, but you feel the tightness, you feel the limit within the body. All right, that that's not natural. That I can't go any further, which is why everything else in the anatomy is, starts to do something, right? So if you're doing something and you make somebody, whether they're standing straight up and down, and then all of a sudden you make them move a little bit to one side or direction, forward, backward, left to right, or whatever it is, right? That you're impacting that anatomy in some way, shape, or form. Why are they moving that? Well, they're doing that to compensate for where the discomfort is or the limit is for that particular movement. And so people don't understand that. And they're like, okay, if I just move a little bit, it don't hurt anymore. It's not as tight as it was. And so that's the limit. Like, that's when you should know, okay, I should know that I need to say stop, mate, tap, whatever it is, right? That's the limit. And so, and as you had said clearly, about it, if you feel the pain, then it's too late. You don't wait for the pain to be able to say that it's time. That's the maximum spot of this position or the movement or the technique that's applied.
Right. One of the things I have, I think it's an upcoming editorial. I think the title is Feel, Feel, and as you're bringing up, Darren, one of the things we have to get our students to recognize is that you have to determine the effectiveness of what you're doing by how it feels to you, and as you said, by how your opponent is moving. You can't do it by, are they in pain? Because people have different pain thresholds. Persons on drugs are not going to may not feel, or they're high or what have you, they may not feel pain anyway. And you have to know by feel and having the technique done to you of what the technique is doing, how it moves the body, and as you brought up earlier, younger people, that's a lot of conceptual information that's hard for them to manage. Because the only real way to determine if techniques are effective is how it feels to you, the person who is doing the technique. Because if you're doing the technique correctly, your attacker or uke is going to move in a certain direction, and that's what you're after. And to you, the pain is irrelevant, which is kind of I don't know. As long as your attacker is moving in the direction you want them to go, you really don't care how much pain they're in. And
I found that a good drill for advanced students to be able to start to understand that whole concept better is to be able to perform techniques without being able to see. And so now you have to be able to say, look, if you're inside of the drill, you're doing it to where they're all defendable somethings, right? But you have to be able to perform technique effectively without being able to see, while maintaining control and understanding what's happening, right? And that not only means your awareness for before you can't see any longer, but how you're applying the technique, what the result of the technique is, what you're doing with the technique. And so at an advanced level, I find that truly helps people understand that whole concept better.
one thing I've done, which may assist you on this, and I'll do this with brown and black belts on rare occasion. You can get face masks, eye masks from Amazon, or like you get a bag of 50 for $2, something like that. They're dirt cheap. And I'll have a brown or black belt who's a Tory put the blindfold on. And then he will be attacked with uke, and the uke uses only body time, grabs, holds, things of this sort. And the Tory's responsibility is to use jujitsu techniques to defend himself with. And because he can't see what he's doing, he has to be able to do everything by feel. And students get pretty good at it after a while, because we really do rely on our sight to help determine if we're doing the technique right. But one of the things that happens is once they start to get the hang of this, even blindfolded, they start moving really fast. They're doing the technique correctly, but they start moving really fast, and you have to slow them down. That's just a safety concern with that activity, because they're not relying on visual sense, they're relying on sensory, feeling sense, and that's a real direct communication to the brain. Nothing has to be interpreted. So it's something that you might want to try with your advanced students. But keep in mind, the one thing you really may have to do is tell them to slow down.
Yes, we keep an eye on that and make sure that pace stays at a consistent pace that is safe for the entire, whether it be the Tory or the uke on both sides. And it's a pretty good drill for us, And then I like to also take away some other senses as well, like not only the sight, but okay, let's take away the hearing aspect of it too. So we try to throw a lot of distractive noise, whether we're drumming on the mat or talking or making sounds or whatever behind it, because then they start to anticipate trying to use other senses on what may happen, right? In some of those drills, whether if you're doing a grab attack or approach or whatever it is, and trying to defend themselves with not being able to see, they're anticipating what might be there because they heard it. And so taking that away as well as the sight certainly is another thing that we help to be able to respond to the unknown, if you will.
One of the things and this is a real world situation, because of the junior high taught out for many years, we had some serious gang problems, and occasionally I would get involved with talking with one gang member, and because usually if there are 3 or 4 other potential opponents, someone will try to get behind you. And usually I would, without looking at him, I would probably say to the person I'm talking to, and they understood it. I said, "Will you get your chihuahua off my back?" Now, what does a chihuahua do? He gets behind you and he nips at your heels. It's a distraction. And whenever I've used that phrase, it's amazing. That person behind me, there's maybe it's eye contact between the person I'm talking to and the chihuahua, but that person gets out from behind me because they know I know they're there and what their purpose is. So it's a tactic I've used in the past, and you say it in a nice calm voice, and I say, if people realize that you're aware of the terminology that they may use, they tend to be more cautious of what's going on, because they know you're not some white dude who doesn't know what he's doing or situation he's in. And and I don't think one of those situations has ever turned into a physical conflict. Because the other point is that if you're in this situation, whomever you talk to, you always address in a very respectful manner. And that's something I've never seen anyone not appreciate. And that usually will tone down any type of issue. You may be thinking of calling them other things, but that's not going to fly. But anyway, that's another issue. One of the reasons Seki said, and I have the same logic, and I think Darryn has said it in so many words, is you don't want students below a certain age in your dojo, is because I forgot what it was. They realize they need to know that anything they do can hurt another person. And that's a serious consideration in whatever you're doing in terms of self-defense. Because if you are attacked, on the one hand, you don't really want to hurt this person. On the other hand, the amount of injury they sustain is not really your fault. Because as Seki said, you're helping them go where they want to go. And as I'm sure all of us, our sensei have always told us, you never fight a person. For Seki was, if you fight someone, that is the most inhuman thing you can do in the lowest level of morality, because you've just reverted to an animal state. On the other hand, if they attack you and you help them go on their way, that's a different approach. And so there's a certain mindset you have to help your students develop. That, even if they have to defend themselves, they're not fighting. And that's why you need a certain amount of intellectual maturity on the part of young people. Because it doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean that you may feel bad that they were hurt. Of all the students I've had that have been in street situations, all of them have been upset that they actually physically hurt someone. And we're talking about fractures, concussions, things of that sort. But to know that you are to know that you are not the aggressor is an important factor in them kind of maintaining, what do you call it? Some sort of understanding that they're not the person at fault for this injury. And that's why, as Darryn said, you want students to have a certain amount of maturity so they can understand this, because it's a mental concept, not a physical concept.
Sensei, I my ADHD kicked in for a second here, and when you were talking, one of the comments that you made struck me for a potential future topic, and it's so I'm sorry for the off track again, but it's just Aikido versus BJJ, and then I want to add to it. It's going to be like, or versus jujitsu, or versus boxing, or versus any other karate. It could be anything, right? And so what I want to try to do is find this video that I could send to you, so you can use this as the baseline of a potential topic in the future. And I'll explain more to you if I find a video and I'm able to get it over to you. It's a very short video that you could take a look at, that we could use for a future topic on how these things are applied, whether it's jujitsu or how they're used, whether you have to be able to face off against someone else that does something different, or if you're using it for self-defense or whatever it is. I'm sorry for being off track. I just thought it would be a good opportunity to share a potential future topic with you.
That's okay. That's where our future topics come from.
I would like to, I've thought about your topic a lot, but it's always jujitsu versus this, or karate versus this, and what's better than this, that, or the other thing. But how about rethinking it and saying, how can you blend your jujitsu with your aikido, because aikido came from jujitsu, or in your karate, how is your karate used along with your jujitsu? And we're having a seminar in the end of February, and I asked if I could do a piece on how you use jujitsu and Tai Chi. And what I found when I take Tai Chi, you do the slow motions, and if you teach the student slowly, like you teach them in Tai Chi, they actually learn faster because they're forced to think about all the moves instead of trying to hurry up and do an osotogari and have the guy fall over the feet instead of the hip and stuff like that. So, and what I've talked about with other people is that the higher the rank you get, the more you realize a martial art is a martial art, and they all blend together, and they all have similar movements. So when you say karate versus aikido or BJJ, it's not versus, but how to use it with it. And to me, that would be more instructive.
That I agree, Irvin. It's just that I was saying that in that regard because this video that I want to find was specifically saying BJJ versus Aikido. And that's the reason why I said that. But you're right. The understanding of how you're applying whatever technique from whatever system that you're doing is how it can be effective or not and why it's effective or not. And there's so many other subtopics that can come off of that people don't understand that, you know, the even people that are even senior rank in advanced rank in one system or style don't understand why something could be effective or how it could be blended with another system to be able to be effective in using it, right? They don't understand the concepts of it. So you see a lot of these videos and these publications or you hear these conversations of people saying that doesn't work because of this. And to me, I'm like, well, that doesn't work because you truly don't understand the application of that particular thing is designed to do and when the appropriate time to use it is, or how do you mix it in to be able to be effective somewhere else, right? And so people don't understand that. And I think that even at advanced levels, those advanced people don't understand it, so they're not at the level to where they think they probably think that they are.
Yeah, I think what we're getting into here is, if we take another step further, it doesn't matter what rank you are. I still learn stuff from my students, and the key is to have an open mind as long as you don't see it going into an injury, and to be able to take this example. I was doing it many years ago. I was doing a seminar, part of a seminar at a weekend, Camp Danzanru, which is put on by Danzanru Jiu-Jitsu Federation. And Wally J was there. It was not the first time we had met. And I was doing ground submissions, and one of the things I did was a figure four lock. And I would have, once I set it up, I would have the person's foot, if you can recall the figure four leg lock, the person's foot would actually be towards my right hip. And Wally J came up to me and says, "Why do you have it towards the right hip? Shouldn't it be towards your left hip?" And I said, "Well, if it's towards your left hip, he has a lot of leverage because it's most of your body is behind that left hip. That's where most of your weight is. And if he is strong enough, all he has to do is straighten out his leg and you go flying off into the sunset. If his foot is pointed towards your right hip on your right side, all your weight is forward of that, and he really doesn't have anything he can push against." And he looks at me and says, "That makes sense." You know, and I've learned techniques from him. You and variation, you have to keep an open mind, because that's part of what helps you grow as a martial artist, and across arts, across different routes. One of my students actually came up with the term. I used to have difficulty teaching hip throws to students because I said your butt has to be in the right place. And one day, a student said, "Have you ever been camping, Mr. Sensei?" I said, "Yeah." They said, and out in the boondocks, and you know how to squat down when you're doing your duty? I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, maybe that's how you should come in for a hip throw." I said, "Okay." And so that evolved into something nicer where it simply says, when you come in for a hip throw, make sure that the person's right thigh is in the cleavage between your cheeks, or the crack in your butt, if you want to be a little more crude. And once it was put that way, and this is, the way anatomy is built, the hip throw became easy for students to learn because they had their butt in the right place. Is it a stupid way of saying it? Sure is. But it works. And so sometimes weird explanations make sense, particularly if you can relate it to human anatomy. And sometimes, just out of humor, some students would say, "But I've got my cheeks are on my face." And I say, "Yes, you have another pair behind you." Yeah.
It's all in what they relate to, Sensei, on how they interpret it.
And if you can get people to laugh at some of your explanations, it means they understand it. And that, as a sensei, is what you're after. And I mean, I've had people say that's not the correct way to explain how to set up for a hip throw. And my response is, but it works. And everybody understands it. So, I don't know what you can do. But I like Darryn, your thing, because I've been jotting down some notes. The understanding of movements, because they do cross there are common movements that do cross all martial arts. And that's one of the things that really ties us together. Um, uh, if you, for example, a simple Teinagi or Kote Gaish, Seki didn't teach just one way to do it. He taught us maybe half. I don't know how many variations there are in the big book, maybe 15 or 20 different ways to do this technique. And all of them are right. And there are some systems that'll say, this is the only way to do it. And then you come up with, he even had a variation where instead of using your thumb, you set this up this way, then you came with if this was your right hand, you came up with your right kneecap and placed it on top of their back of their hand, and then you drop down. And yes, you do a side fall real fast because you value your wrist. But they're all. That was one of the nice things about Seki. There was very rarely anything where it was only one way to do it. There are some ways that are easier. There's some ways that are more effective. There's some ways that are better. But in the street, you don't always have that choice. Anyway, in all of this, should there be a minimum age for jiu-jitsu students? We'll take one more question. We're going to leave it part of that, and we're going to leave it then. Does a sensei have a responsibility for developing moral judgment and values in students? Do we as sensei have a responsibility in that area?
Of course we do, Sensei. We should always have that. We should always have that intention. Does it always work out that way? That's beyond our control. But we should absolutely have that in thought in training people for sure.
Okay. I mean, is it always necessary that if because I ran into this a couple of occasions in my classroom, high school classroom, economics. Some of the kids would get into arguments, and this is a you may yeah, all of us are aware of this. The tu madre game, yo mama, depending on their ethnicity, you know, and someone from a or your mother, and then you come up with some derogatory statement. And if you do it within your own culture, it's okay, but to cross over into someone else's culture and say it is going to get you in deep trouble. So how do you get young people to do the best they can to avoid a physical conflict?
It's challenging. There's a lot of different
Or maybe
considerations that they have there, right? You have the young person or the individual. It doesn't have to be young. It could be anybody, right? There's a lot of other factors that come into play, and the ultimate goal is to make sure that the individual that you know is a student is doing the right thing or having the right judgment or making the right decision, you know, ethically, morally. And so, but there's a lot of things that go in a lot of cases in a instant that cross that individual's mind. And so it's certainly a challenge to be able to say who's right or wrong in different scenarios when you're not there or involved in them or not seeing them or have an opportunity to interact in. But the instruction that comes before that is important on how you're developing an individual to be able to observe, understand the consequences in what is likely going to be an instant to be able to make a responsible decision.
Hey, Darryn, where were you born and raised?
New Orleans.
New Orleans? Okay,
Yes.
down south. So
Yes,
if you
sir.
call somebody a boy, you better be careful who you're saying that to.
Yes.
Okay. I'm born and raised in California, Central California, basically. And from being a 4-year-old on up, I have older brothers that said, if anybody ever calls you a chink, just punch them in the nose and we'll all back you on it. So it's exactly what you said. And what Sensei said is, it depends on your culture, what you do. So once upon a time, it happened. Somebody called me a chink and bam, I just hit him in the nose. Of course, I went to the principal's office and everything, and they had a nice long discussion with me that, hey, that does not always mean it's derogatory. It's the other kid just did not realize it's a bad word in our culture. So it's like if you call somebody a boy, you got to be careful who you're saying that to. And it's exactly what we're talking about is
Yes.
how do you explain that to a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old? And when we're talking about language and stuff is I didn't take jujitsu until I was 40 years old. My kids started when they were 8 years old. And one of my kids was telling me, Dad, you can't explain that to kids that way. They don't understand what you're saying. So when you're trying to teach them morals or the American morals or culture, you got to be real careful about what you say to them, how you say it to them, and what context. And if you were born in New Orleans, I suspect you were with a lot of white folks. My neighborhood had Mexicans, Filipinos, blacks, uh, Asians, and one German family. and the German family had a hard time fitting in
Yeah,
just because of the cultural differences.
that's right.
So,
It's interesting to use the term white folk, because that would get some people upset too. Yeah,
Yes.
you do have to be careful of what you say, and it applies often. When I taught high school, we'd at least once a year run into discussions of where some of these terms came from, and I'd actually have the kids research it because because the origin of many of these terms was not derogatory, even though the word like white folk or chink or boy took on a derogatory terminology as the word or term was used more from its original meaning, and it really gives you a different perspective of like why are Mexicans sometimes referred to as wetbacks. And that was because when they crossed the Rio Grande, you would see their backs, and their backs would be wet. It's a stupid explanation, but that's where the term wetback came from. Rednecks, which are usually people from Oklahoma. It's a derogatory term, but the farmers out there, when they farm in the fields, their backs of their necks will get sunburned, and that's why they were called rednecks. And if you can get, if a student uses that term in a derogatory manner, I would usually say, I want you to, I'll give you extra credit, but I want you to find out where that word came from and what it means. And it's usually an education for them. And so they begin to realize that some of the derogatory language we use to upset another person, we tend to be more careful in its use because we know that there are other words that can be used that are just as insulting and demeaning, and nobody likes to be demeaned. So if a 14-year-old says to another 14-year-old male, your mother looks ugly, or your girlfriend is a dog, you're not going to haul off and punch him in the nose. I don't know what you're going to say in response, other than maybe, I'm sorry you feel that way. And that's hard for a kid to do. So, it's hard to get kids to develop some sense of morality and their judgment. I mean, some kids develop a good sense of judgment early on, and some kids develop a sense of judgment once they're in their 60s and 70s. So it's a hard responsibility for a sensei, but it's something you have to do because a verbal insult or verbal onslaught is not going to hurt you physically. It may hurt you emotionally, but it doesn't hurt you physically. And you have to find a way to compensate for that without being physical. But okay. See, I want to skip over the value of these Zoom meetings because I'd like to have more people that have been in a number of them. Same thing for your organization, dojo, personal rue. Next topic is Budoshin Jujitsu syllabus clarifications. And I don't think Irving has a copy of that. I know Darryn does, but again, that's what. Let's go to what I think is topic number 6 here, which which is the last one I'd like to get into today. And that is, we already touched on it very briefly, teaching and learning variations and skills. What is the most effective way of teaching? Different ways to teach, teaching students with limitations, modifying belt rank, modifying techniques for belt rank. That's probably the easiest thing to deal with. So let's deal with that first. Do you, okay. Seki said to students periodically when you get a group of new students, he says, I'm teaching the art. I don't care what age you are, you're going to learn the technique as they were meant to be used. Okay. And then he would modify it so that if you have he'd teach a white belt technique one way, he'd teach a brown belt a variation of the technique another way. One of the things that would happen is, and I use the term cross-pollination, sometimes you'd have upper belts working with lower belts, and they teach the upper belt variation of a technique or the additional variation of a technique. Do you think students should be taught just one variation of one way to do the technique, or should there be variations of the technique taught based upon the student's age, belt rank, maturity, that sort of thing?
I think that you should teach the technique from depending on the experience level of the individual that you're giving instruction to, the most basic concept. And then as they advance, so does the different applications, the different approaches, and then also the consideration of you always have another individual that has a different perspective, a different look at it, a different approach, a new idea, a new way of doing it, to be able to adopt those things as they continue to advance. There's a lot of times a confusion of what techniques are when they're asked to be performed. And I'll use your Tenagi as an example. We talked about one, and you just talked about a variation of a Tenagi, right? A Kotegaeshi. And so there's multiple ways of doing that technique. And so for the understanding and the development of being able to perform that technique, you should start at a basic understanding, a basic concept of the technique that's relative to the individual that you're instructing. And then as they gain that knowledge and understanding of the concept behind the technique, then that could be advanced as they continue to advance their skill set. The confusion to people when they get into an intermediate and then even sometimes into an advanced level is the hidden part of a technique, or not necessarily a hidden part of a technique, but the technique that's hidden within something else. If you're asking me to perform a Tenagi Kotegaeshi, and I do something that maybe involves that technique, let's say with a Tayatoshi. If you're asking to see it and I do Tayatoshi, then some people see Tayatoshi, but did you see the Tenagi that was involved in it? So they would call it two different things. And so the understanding was that the ask was for Tenagi. But just because I added the Tayatoshi doesn't mean that it was incorrect. You're missing the part that I performed the Tenagi, but I just included the Tayatoshi. And so people miss that at times. I don't know if I kind of went off on a little bit, but that's a little bit of what I would.
I understand what you're saying. It's like combining Tenagi with an Otoshi. And The only thing when I have students do Teinagi and combine it with a Tai Otoshi body drop throw, I make sure I say, you need to slack off on the Teinagi as you're doing the throw, because if you do the Tai Toshi correctly, it will, and you have the set for the Teinagi, you're going to end up dislocating their elbow or breaking their right arm. We're not even talking about the wrist yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh
So
yeah, you're advanced at that point. That's an advanced level, right? So you better know how to fall and fall pretty quick.
Right. You have to be careful with when you're teaching what. I originally learned Teinagi for a straight knife thrust. That's how Seki taught it. But he didn't tell us, he said, but you got to get out of the way of the knife. So you have to, he never gave us a drill on how to pivot our right foot back to get our body out of the way of a knife thrust, or left foot back. He never taught that. His attitude, he very rarely explained how to do a technique. It was, watch me. And you and I and Irving all know that by watching a person, you still miss things because you can't watch everything. And, eventually you realize, gee, I got to get my body out of the way. And there's really only one or two ways to do it safely without getting cut. And then I can do the Teinagi. But I've got to get their hand before they pull their knife hand back.
Right.
So there are a lot of very complicated moves that he assumed we'd pick up. Whereas if I teach Teinagi to a new student, it'll be for a lapel grab, because then I can see exactly what they are doing. And there's, it's really very simple. This is how you do it.
Yeah, Sensei, maybe that's a better way of putting what I was trying to say, and that's why you're who you are and where I am in my education and learning and development today. So, but it's the same thing, right? You're trying to advance, right? And so from a lapel grab, they're at the most basic concept of being able to perform the technique, and then maybe from a knife thrust, then they're at more of an intermediate to an advanced level of performing the technique. And then what's all the dynamics that are associated with it. One of the things that I say, and I think you've seen me actually instruct this in the classroom environment, was that people get confused on how to apply those technique, that one specific technique effectively. Like, so if, for example, if you're doing it from a lapel grab, then you apply the Teinagi in the most static form. It doesn't have to be where you're turning your whole body. That can go to the rear of the uke, to the side of the uke, because there's no commitment in the attack. There's no intent to kind of go through. But if you're doing it from a knife low strike and they have a full commitment and there's full intention on like going straight through you, and that momentum is going, then there's more movement that's involved in it. There's more spin to it. If you try to do that from the most basic concept of it, then you're just giving your back up to the person who's attacking you. And then why would you do that? So there's so many different approaches and so many different dynamics and many considerations on why you would perform the technique at different angles, if you will. And so I think that's in the development of it, but also the basic understanding and when and how to effectively apply technique.
Right. I think what you're saying is, I'll start them off with, okay, for lapel, which is pretty, like you said, static. Then I'll say, okay, now for a hit, how would you do the Teinagi? Right fist attack.
Right.
And it'll confuse a lot of them until I say, well, and they really mess up. I say, well, you deflect the hit to your right, they come over, the hand is there. And once you see the hand, and they have to get the concept, if you see the hand, even if they're grabbing you, if you can see the hand and you understand how the technique works, there's the hand, use it. And once they get that concept down, which is what you're after with your more advanced students,
right,
then the Tenagi or Kotegaishi becomes a no-brainer technique. And it's why I said many years ago, I think in jiu-jitsu there may be, and in one of my books, there may be only 20 or 30 actual moves in jiu-jitsu. It's the combinations that get you.
The unscripted combinations, Sensei, because that's where people overlook them, right? Like we give the basic or common scenario for people to understand how to apply technique, and then they're blind or oblivious to the thousands of ways that you can actually apply it, right? It's in a scramble, but you're doing the same thing. And as you said, the most simplest form and concept is the hand is right there. You're still doing this. You're still doing this with it, right? Like you still can do the technique. It doesn't have to be off of a lapel grab. It doesn't have to be off of a punch. It doesn't have to be off of a knife attack. It's in all of these other places if you can get to the hand, right? There's no limit to the imagination of where you apply it. It's whenever you grab the hand.
Right. The same thing, you can apply the same concept of the technique to if someone tries to kick you and you can trap their foot. And you're going to do the same body movement to do the, I guess, be ashi makikomi, or we just crank the right foot. And you're basically doing the same technique as you were for the hand throw. And to me, this is what makes the art the art. And I say to students sometimes, in most cases, the attack is irrelevant. It's what you do with it that. And this is one of the advantages of going to the blindfold, is that they have to rely on, for the hearing issue, they have to rely on the concept of feel, and all hands feel the same, all feet feel, if a person is wearing cowboy boots, you're going to do the same technique to them as if they were wearing no shoes or socks at all.
Some flip-flops.
Pardon?
Flip-flops.
Flip-flops might be the only, or what do they call those things? Crocs? Those might be the only two footwear that might cause you problems in executing. Good point, Darren.
But you get the foot though, Sensei. You still get the foot.
You still get the foot. And then you can step in with your right foot, put it behind their left foot, snap your heel down, turn to your left, and you've done a taitosh. So, it's to me, that's part of the fun of jiu-jitsu, is that, once you know your core techniques, the body is there for you.
That's right. Which leaves it, we could read all of the books, we could write all of the books, we could say all of the things that we want to, and we never cover everything.
No.
Somebody else could think of a different application, a different approach, a different way.
Yeah, it is. And see, I'm jotting things down here. Okay, I think we're going to stop at this point, and these things, we still need to come. There are still some things, teaching, learning, variations, and skills. There some we didn't even touch on the topics that are in the list, but that's okay. I think we're going to stop at this point because it's 9:27, and Irving has a hot date with his fiance in a few minutes. You're taking her out to breakfast?
How'd you know?
Or have I gotten you in trouble now? So anyway, so I want to thank you for, and Darren, thank you for all your input today. And
Darren, are you still in New Orleans?
Yes.
Good.
I'm just outside of New Orleans in Mandeville. So
Vanderbilt, okay.
I'm
Not too
just
far away.
north across Lake Pontchartrain. I'm just across Lake Pontchartrain from New Orleans. I could look at the city across the lake, but I'm on the other side of the lake.
Yeah.
It's a short drive on a long bridge.
Yes, sure.
My fiance and I one of these days plan to go to New Orleans, so I'll try. But
Yeah, if you ever come,
that's near the
please think
bottom
of
of our
something.
list. We have other things to do.
It's a great city. There are some wonderful street bands. It's just food is great there too.
Yeah.
I think my daughter and wife had their first with a Cane's chicken.
Yeah.
There, and there's one out here in Southern California now. It's about 15 miles away, and we know what city it's in, but we need to find this address, and then we're gonna take Kim, my daughter, and go there one day for dinner or lunch.
Yeah.
Wow.
Probably
Sounds
not.
good to me.
Well, maybe not the most healthiest food, but can't have everything.
Hey, once in a while, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's good. Good chain, Sensei. Good chain.
Yeah. So anyway,
But Irvin, if you ever come, look us up. Come on, visit.
okay. Anyway, wish you guys a great weekend. It's a 3-day weekend. Maybe that's why we didn't do well today, because everybody else is someplace else. But want you have a good 3-day weekend. Take it easy. And
Okay. Thank you much. We'll see you guys.
I won't say may the force be with you. I'll say may the key be with you. Okay, take care.
Sensei, I sent you a video. I found a video while we are on, and I sent it over to you. And just to kind of give you a base understanding of what I was, and we jumped in some other of the subtopics as what I was thinking of. But if you look at that video, it was this thing is called McDojo Life, and what they do is expose what they feel like things are not effective or legitimate. That's a better word. Legitimate techniques or styles or systems or Rue. And so they try to expose that, right? And so this guy, when you watch the video, is saying that Aikido is the most effective self-defense route that you could, martial art that you could take, and the Aikido practitioner at the highest level can easily defeat a BJJ practitioner at the highest level any day, anytime, anywhere, like in any. And so what they do is they get this guy, the guy that's saying it, who doesn't look like he's even close to the physical ability of the BJJ person that they get in, and they put that scenario to test by saying, okay, you think that Aikido could do this, and it's going to be better than a BJJ guy, and the BJJ guy goes into a dojo area, and then they basically square them off to fight. And so the BJJ guy beats up. It doesn't beat him up, but they're testing their abilities, if you will, but in a dojo environment to fight. And I think that's the most the most misconstrued observation of two different styles to have an effective approach to what each one of them are designed to be used as effective self-defense as you could possibly get. So basically they were saying that, yeah, Aikido is no good. It's not effective. It's not this, it's not that. And the BJJ was more dominant and it's more realistic. And I think that's the most misunderstood or most misconstrued approach of two conflicting styles of martial art that have their areas of effectiveness in different scenarios. I think hearing that and then watching the video, you'll understand what I'm saying better. Watch the video. It's like maybe 2 minutes or whatever, but take a look at it when you get a chance. And I think that could be a good topic for us.
I run into the same issue when there are some systems of jujitsu. They can do kata beautifully, and they can have prearranged kata sequences, and they look fantastic. But you put them in a random situation, they can't fight their way out of a paper bag. I think all martial arts ideally have a common goal to make you a better person, to avoid conflict, all these ideal things. And they each give you certain sets of tools to deal with people who have issues, to put it tactfully.
Right.
And it doesn't mean, in my book, it doesn't mean I've had BJJ people come to the dojo and say, well, what's the difference in BJJ and Japanese JJ? And I said, do you have rules? They say, yes. I said, we don't. And that causes them to step back. And they say, well, if I pin you down on the mat with a lock and you can't get out of it, haven't I won? And I'll say, do you know what a shark bite is? That little pinch on the,
Right.
Or what happens if I stick my finger up your nose and turn it? And they say, that's not fair.
Right.
I said, well, maybe that's a difference. We're not concerned about the morality of what we do if we have to defend ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, one of the things that came up before in dealing with students is this is why I like talking with you. You've got a great head on your shoulders. Very challenging. No, at times. No, I mean that as a compliment.
Thank you, Sensei.
The hardest thing to do is to say, okay, in this martial art or in jiu-jitsu, we have a very high standard of behavior, what you should and shouldn't do and what you should avoid to be a better person, yada, yada, yada. But if you're attacked on the street, there are no rules.
That's right.
And the only way you can effectively defend yourself in a street situation may be not to worry about any rules because your life's at stake.
That's right.
And that sets some BJJ people back. And I was thinking of it the other day, I said, almost every martial art, including jiu-jitsu competitions, all have rules to minimize the chance of injury. And what is our intent in jiu-jitsu? If you're in a conflict?
Self-preservation.
Self-preservation, and to do whatever is necessary to prevent injury to yourself.
Right.
And that messes with people's minds because they'll say, well, it's not right to stick your finger up a person's nose and turn it.
Says who?
Says who?
So so that when you get there, the foundation of that topic, that conversation continues to elevate from me. And because I'm constantly in these conversations, you've been hearing it from me for years, Sensei. And so, that also continues to drive me to where these BJJ practitioners that go and they think that there's a difference between BJJ and Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. And I'm like, you do realize that what you refer to as BJJ, that's when you get into the origins, right? The lineage behind the system. Like, you do realize that's Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, right? Like, you're doing a fraction of what we do. We do all of what you do. You do a fraction of what Japanese Jiu-Jitsu is. A very, very, very small piece. We could defend ourselves on the ground. All of those techniques that you're using, that you're referring to as BJJ, are Japanese Jiu-Jitsu techniques. There's no BJJ. There's Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. That's the origin of what you're doing. You're missing that piece of it. You're using a fraction of what we do for sport. We're doing every bit of what Japanese Jiu-Jitsu is for self-defense in a real life application. That's everything. The last place that we want to be is on the floor. You're doing that because you have a referee that's involved. You're doing that because you're participating in a sport, and we're doing it for survival, right? And so the last place that we want to be is on the floor, and we're going to do all of these other things, the no rules, right? The things that you don't like, the things that you say that's not fair. And so they're like, no, it's all BJJ. And I'm like, okay, what do you call this technique? And so they coin different techniques, different terminology so they can reference them. But the funniest part about it is when they coin some of those techniques and their most popular technique, they're calling it a Japanese person, their name, right? They're saying that technique is this name, Kimura, right? And I'm like, no, it's not a Kimura. That you understand that's a person, right? It's not a technique. The technique is an udekarama, which is interpreted by figure 4 lock, right? You understand that. It's Japanese. And then they're just looking at you like,
what I was just going to mention Kimura because there's such I did a Kimura and pinned him and he tapped out. I said, oh, you mean Udegruma or
right.
I said, why are you naming this after a person?
Exactly. And so then they reflect and that starts to sink in because they're like, wait up, that makes sense. And I'm like, of course it makes sense. I'm breaking it down for you in literal form. Like you're only and I agree. Look, you have to believe in what you're doing, right? That's why they're so adamant about it, because you have to believe in what you're doing. If you don't believe in what you're doing, then it's then you're losing the battle, right? So what they're taught is what they believe in, and what they believe in is what they're preaching, and what they're preaching is what they're doing. But then they're not educated completely, right? They don't understand. That's why the origins are so important for people to understand those things, and they don't. And so the more that they hear that, I think the better it is. And I truly and again, you've been hearing this from me for years, but I truly think that the credit doesn't go back to Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. There's so many different things now that people like to try to adopt and own and take credit for in lineage and origins that I feel like that needs to be recycled back into the understanding of martial arts and where it came from. I do have some articles, Sensei, and they were very, very close to all being published in different publications, from Black Belt Magazine to other entities out there, and with all of the dynamics of everything else that were going on, for whatever reasons they've opted out. But maybe I'll give it to you to put in the Kokoroo.
I'd love to have it, and I'm just going to ask can I include this discussion between us as part of this?
Oh, sure, absolutely. I mean, you tell me that
I'll tell a BJJ person, I said, you're great on the ground, probably better than I am, because that's your slice.
Yes,
you said, and I said, but there are things I'm going to do on the ground that you haven't been trained in. I don't want to go to the ground unless I absolutely have to, because that's the worst place to be in a street situation, right?
Right.
And they say, yeah. And I said, so this is what BJJ specializes in. But I said, I've had to deal with self-defense situations. I've been threatened with a knife. And I said, I have never had to go to the ground for any technique. And neither have any of my students who've been in street situations, because it's over in 5 to 6 seconds, tops.
Right.
And I said, but going to the ground, you're probably in a better situation.
But look, Sensei, by no means is that in an effort to discredit them?
Correct.
There's some very, very good BJJ practitioners out there, very, very top level BJJ.
Yes.
And does that mean that every single person is going to win in every single dynamic in every single scenario? No, I'm not discrediting that. I'm saying that you have some very, very talented BJJ practitioners in that regard in the sporting environment. But in reality, the last place that you do want to be is on the floor. But does that mean that they're not good? No, that doesn't mean. It just means that you're missing the understanding of the technique, the origins of it, the lineage of it, and where you should apply it, right? In a sporting environment, yes, that's okay. And then even in reality, the last place that you want to be is on the floor, but does it go there? It does. It does go there at times. Not every single time. And so when you look at the statistics behind people going to the floor, the ground, in a real life scenario, those things are heightened, and they're heightened because they use statistics that come from law enforcement to where they're commanding the individual to be on the floor. Right. Not necessarily that it went to the floor, because they commanded them to be on the floor so they can do what's necessary to secure that individual, for that law enforcement official to be in the safest position, right? To put them at the most disadvantaged area on the floor.
Right.
Right. And so that's why they command them to be there, for the safety of the officer, the law enforcement official, but not because that the altercation went to the floor. Right. And so the misunderstanding of those facts has them thinking a different way. But look, again, to stress that there's some very, very, very talented individuals in BJJ, there's also some very, very talented practitioners in Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. The origin of that whole entire dynamic, right? That's where it came from. And so again, a very, very, very small piece of what they're doing in BJJ is the entire art of Japanese Jiu-Jitsu.
Right. I mean, I've taught for law enforcement agencies, and I've taught them, you're correct many times, is you need to have them go to the ground, because ultimately that gives you the most control over them, the perpetrator. But I've also learned how to control a person through police officer training programs. I've also learned how to, there are a lot of situations where you can control the person with pain or what have you while they are still standing, depending on how your situation, you can use a wall for them, or how you're grabbing their fingers, or all these other factors where you can do a lot of this stuff standing up.
Yes.
Unless they become resistant. And then if they become resistant, then the ground is the best place for them. What's the worst place for them to be, which is why you put them down to the ground.
Right.
But, like you said, it doesn't mean, because that's a BJJ specialty, it doesn't mean that we're denigrating BJJ practitioners.
Right.
There's some great jiu-jitsu systems, and there's some, like I said, jiu-jitsu systems where they can't fight their way out of a paper bag, but they do beautiful kata. I'm sure the same thing applies in Aikido and Judo. You can do beautiful demonstrations in any martial art. You can even have a demonstration on how to slice a hot dog beautifully. But it doesn't mean that you're going to be, it doesn't mean that the hot dog's going to be edible after you're done with it.
Right.
Lousy analogy. And that's a misconception that, again, as you said, because they don't have the depth, they don't recognize that.
Yeah. So Sensei, here's my learning thing for today, right?
Okay.
You just said it, and I've never looked at it or thought of it like this before. The floor. Is the floor limited to the floor? I don't think so. You just said it, and it's not.
No.
The floor is a wall. The floor is a table. The floor is a chair. The floor could be any other of these other things that impact your ability to have free movement, right? In a bigger area, a bigger foundation, if you will, right? And so, are you telling me that I can't do jujitsu because I'm not on the floor or I'm not standing? What happens if you are against the wall? You have to be able to do other things. And now all of a sudden you're telling me that you're not on the floor, but you're up against the wall. You still need to be able to perform jujitsu. And I think that hearing that for me today and saying, okay, the floor could be other things,
Right.
is a whole nother dynamic.
Right.
Right.
I mean, I did a seminar about half a year ago, and I said, and it was entitled "Up Against the Wall," and none of the students knew what to do if they were pinned against the wall. My simple comment was, "Can you sidestep? Can you move sideways?" And once they got that concept, they realized, oh, if I sidestep, here's what happens to the person who's pinning me against the wall, and here's what I can do against them. I didn't have to teach any techniques.
Right.
All I really did was, well, slide it one way or the other. Move. and you're right. The wall is the floor, is a table, is a door,
Exactly. So just because the floor becomes vertical doesn't mean that we stop. We still could do everything that we do.
right. Just make sure the drywall is thick enough so you don't.
True.
Been there, done that.
Yeah, same, Sensei.
Very embarrassing. But anyway, hope you have a good weekend.
You too, Sensei.
And don't do anything too dangerous.
Okay.
Okay.
Take a look at that video. Let me know what your thoughts.
I will. Very good. Thank you.
All right, Sensei. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.